Hello, and welcome to the intro episode of the Scholarly Sorcerers podcast. I'm BillbosBag, and this is my co-host, BGJOE.
Hello.
So, I'll introduce myself real quick. I've been in the Realm community since the end of the Wild Shadow era. Basically, I haven't done a ton in the community. I was a raid leader and dungeoneer for a long time, got promoted to admin for a while. When it switched over to new dungeoneer, I kind of stopped playing for a while, so I retired from that. And now I am starting a podcast. So you can now introduce yourself, Joe.
Alright, I am BG Joe, more frequently known as Bobby Joe. I am a moderator on the official Realms of the Mad Discord, and I haven't really done anything else. I was a head raid leader and dungeoneer for a little while, but when the new dungeoneer switched over, I didn't really want to do 03, so I left.
Basically, we're just going to talk about the history of Realm in this episode and how we feel about some things in the game. When I started playing the game, it was late Wild Shadow. There was no such thing as pets. I was like 11, so I didn't know how to play the game at all. I was very bad. I didn't play much back then, but after Kabam took over, they introduced some new stuff. The game was cool for a while. And then the Silent Era hit, where nothing happened for like 3 years. And that's where I spent a lot of time playing.
I started playing during the Silent Era. I don't remember much of it. I do remember there was lots of cheaters. It wasn't very exciting.
100% of the player base had.
Just remember it was like you go into a sprite world and there'd be like a 20-person multi-boxer that just walks over all of the tiles and goes directly to the boss and kills it immediately. Oryx would die in like 2 seconds because HP scaling hadn't been implemented. And then Deca took over. I was on hiatus for a lot of the early Deca era. The old Dark Ages were just so boring that I quit until 2017 March. So I can't comment much on what happened during Deca era in 2016.
I mean, it's valid. Deca didn't do a lot then. It was a lot of event chests, a lot of UDL events. In fact, most of what they were doing was UDL events, which is kind of weird.
And full clear events, I do remember those.
The full clear UDL, where you have to clear the entire UDL.
Trigger every single trap. And it doesn't tell you how many enemies are left. That wasn't added till later. So you just miss one trap and you'd have no idea where it was. You'd scour the whole dungeon and you'd get insta-popped on the last trap.
Deca, at that point in time, I was pretty disappointed. They didn't do a lot. But I'd say Deca has improved the game a lot since then. They've had their setbacks and flaws, but they've had their moments. They've done some good things for
There was like a whole load of events, some kind of big content updates. We had a few dungeons, Mountain Temple, the Hive, this Toxic Sewers. But the big thing is after Unity they started doing a lot of big stuff. There was some fame changes, I do remember. I think that was early 2018 when they changed like the fame UI and actually told you how old your characters were. That's fun. I do not have any characters from before that left.
I don't know if I do or not.
My oldest character is from like March 2018, just after they did that change.
I have a wizard that was created before.
Not old characters. The problem is I played all my old characters and they died.
Yeah, this wizard has been storing my Veteran of 2017 and my
that was something that happened.
My reindeer eggs.
Never took it out of my gift chest. I took the pet rock out of the gift chest. The pet rock was from, I think, April Fool's, either 2017 or 2018. It spawns pet rock, and it does absolutely nothing, but it's cool, and it was in a mystery box as well in 2019. It's a relatively rare item, but not as rare as the Veteran.
I have not seen someone using Veteran of 2017.
Also, I think that just straight up doesn't work anymore.
It does not. I'm trying to use it, and it just doesn't spawn the stuff in. So that's
a lot of stuff gets broken.
They should probably fix it, but Modem G this year is pretty cool.
It's got a cool theme, you know. You had the no one is safe and the cat killed everyone. That was a funny little Easter egg.
Yeah, they reworked Shatters.
There was a scepter like in the files from the testing for Shatters, but it got removed, so we'll never see that scepter. There'll be a scepter one day, but it won't be 2021 unless it is.
There'll be a new scepter when they release Tier 8 items. Tier 8 abilities.
Tier 8 abilities. So also Oryx 4, which is coming in like 30-something years.
No, the tops are gonna alternate. It's gonna be a new boss that has them, and then Oryx for every other top.
Yes, they're gonna add the Epic Void, and Oryx Sanctuary. You just chase Oryx down into the center of the earth.
It's gonna go into Oryx's courthouse, and then Oryx's Capitol building,
Brilliant.
Oryx's nuclear fallout shelter, and just on.
And at that point, it'll just be very scary. There'll be so much power creep in the game that happen. Exaltations, they'll just be non-existent to like standard dungeons. You'll have to do like Oryx's fallout shelter, and then the epic void rework, reconstructed epic void.
No, what's gonna happen is you're gonna have to. They're not gonna change the dungeon exalts are on, and they'll just add a new system.
Yeah.
So you
But
can
just
still
add, like,
exalt your characters by
they'll add
doing the old dungeons. But
You
then
just exalt your exalt further. Now, I think they mentioned something about doing a massive rework of exaltations, which would be cool because they're not the best implemented. I don't think it could be done better, anyways.
I don't want to have to re-exalt characters though.
I have not done much exalting, so I wouldn't mind. But there are already people who have exalted everything, so I can't imagine they'd be happy if they reset exalts. But it would be nice to have a better system for exaltation.
The problem is after you implement something, it's really hard to go back and fix it.
And people were really mad when they reset dungeon completes that had like virtually no purpose. They just were like a number on realm line, and people were super angry when they got reset.
Yeah, I mean, like dungeon completes were something people farmed out to try and get to the.
And there were also people who exploited to just get tens of millions of them.
I mean, that's why they reset them.
That's like, if you want to play the game all day, you know, you can run pirate caves for the rest of your life. Maybe you'll see those leader rewards.
I'm gonna be the best pirate player experience.
And all the Scallywag Slurp Pet skins you'd get. I got the Scallywag Slurp Pet skin after only a few hundred pirate caves.
I'm gonna try and figure out what the order of dungeons Deca added was. I know some of the early ones were like Mountain Temple, Parasite.
I do remember Mountain Temple release, and the Changing Heart statues did not drop an event white. And they also killed tons of people. That was a fun time. And Orb of Aether didn't exist. Orb of Aether was a pretty good addition. Now Mountain Temple has a couple great white bag drops, a pretty good ST set even. And that tea room, which it exists. Not much more to say to it. It's just a funny looking chest. It just drops a couple of STs. Ronin's Wakazashi is the big thing, which is pretty good, but all the clearing you have to do, it's not actually that much, but a lot of people do not care about that. It's all about the efficiency these days. And if you're not getting the best items, then it's not really worth the time. Ronin's Wakazashi you don't see just because we've got the Sentinel sidearm item Shatters. That's a really powerful Wakazashi right there. It has 3 homing shots that do 1000 damage. Very nice item. I used it on testing. It kind of obliterated Sentinel, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so Hive, Sewers, and Encore got released at about the same time.
Oh, Encore, I forgot about that. That was a Deca era dungeon. Or at least, you know, having a second Quarter Works dungeon is kind of cool, but these days, Encore, it's not even, like, really difficult. Like, they have it dropping Power Pizza from Chef. They put it on the level with Crawling Depths and stuff. Crawling Depths, I'm not sure if it deserves pizza, though. It's not nearly as hard as it was on release. On release, it was really scary. There were some black shots that were hard to see and did a ton of damage. I remember someone dying to those.
I'd say Crawling Depths and Puppet Master's Theater are about the same difficulty.
Encore, yeah, they're about the same now. Originally, reconstructed Crawling Depths, I should specify. It was really scary. And there were minions around the boss room, which I never understood. Why have just one-time minions just spread around the boss room? They just waste time and punish you for not clearing them beforehand. They eventually got removed.
Okay, so the first 3 dungeons Deca released were the Hive, Sewers, and Encore. And then...
Hive, I'm pretty sure it was the UGC dungeon. The other 2 I'm not sure on.
I'm pretty sure Sewers were not UGC. Original Sewers was okay, but it made the death in...
Yeah, it made death no longer guaranteed for a bit. it made sense because having 2 pot drops from a Godlands dungeon didn't make a lot of sense. Sewers thematically is kind of weird for a game like this, but we have Mad Lab, which is even more weird. And the new Sewers kind of has elements from Mad Lab, which is kind of cool, more that environmental storytelling. Which they did say, and on multiple occasions I've asked about it, and they do want to do more of the environmental storytelling rather than just in-your-face sort of like Taichi's cutscenes. The infamously long, and everyone hated it. And it's a lot shorter.
I forgot about the Halloween haunted cemetery.
All that. That is just Encore Reskin, which they then slapped it onto the end of the cemetery, which isn't a bad thing, I suppose. No reason to have this random extra dungeon that just exists for no reason.
The next dungeon on the release timeline is Ice Tomb.
Ice Tomb, it exists. There's really nothing to say about that one. It's Ice Tomb. It has some cool reskin drops though, unlike Halloween Haunted Cemetery.
Some of the drops from it look cool.
They're just the Tomb Lights reskin, but they still look cool. It might even drop Ice Crown. I'm not sure if it's a permanent drop or just an event drop.
I think it's event drop.
This year I wonder what they'll do with Ice Crown. I can't imagine they'll make it as accessible as it's been in previous years now that it drops from the reconstructed shatters. It is a pretty good item. Maybe they will just make it just as accessible as it's been in previous years. Who knows? It'd be interesting to see either way. It might just drop from an Ice Tomb. Who knows? Ice Tomb. I never really liked it because it's just Tomb, which is not like horrible, I suppose. It's a lot of annoying stuff, and you have to fight 3 bosses at once most of the time, unless you somehow miraculously manage to do it clean, which just doesn't happen these days.
Okay, the next dungeon they added was Rainbow Road.
I do actually love Rainbow Road. I've always loved the St. Patrick's Day events because I came back in March 2017. That was when they first started doing them. Yeah. And it was really neat to see, honestly. I really enjoyed it. The Rainbow Road I've always loved, even though it's just a chest and a funny looking road.
Well, okay, this was the Rainbow Road that dropped from the Leprechaun, which was the worst event ever.
Okay, originally it was pretty frustrating. It just ran, and a lot of people didn't really understand how it worked, so they'd run up close to it and jump
you
away.
had one dumb warrior who tried to sit on top of it, and then it would run all the way into the Godlands, and all the way back to Spawnlands, and all the way back to the Godlands forever.
They changed how it works though, so after it runs for a bit, it'll trip and drop a bunch of money. So they increased the loot payout, and at the same time, they also made it a lot less frustrating. And so it drops Rainbow Road, which has some skin drops, including the Green Hat Bunny, which is one of my personal favorite pet skins.
Leprechaun is better now, I'll give you that, but I have trauma from the original release. Next up is the first wing of the Mountain Temple.
The first wing of the Mountain Temple.
The first wing.
That aged well.
Yeah.
One day we'll get the second wing.
Probably not.
It'd be cool, but it is a pretty brilliant strategy on Zill, you know, just never appear and you can't die. No one will kill you if you just never exist. You know, if I was a boss in the game, I'd do the same.
Mountain Temple is one of the nicest looking dungeons in the game. Like, its design is really nice. I like it a lot. And I really wish that they would have given it its second wing, but, you know, what can you do? After that was the Sorcerer buffs, which were
the Sorcerer rework, which changed it from being you just click to deal damage to you have to aim in the aiming cone, and has reduced damage per target in Wizmod. The Wizmod is really nice, and I do enjoy making Wizmod focused builds for Sorcerer, but could use another buff.
The Oryx Horde was the next thing they arrived.
Oryx Horde.
It had the Earth Smash without the dungeon.
Yeah, I remember that. That killed a lot of people with the Earth Smash. I do remember the Earth Smash, though. I think they're trying to forget about Oryx Horde, though. It's been 2 years since we've seen it. Last time was for 1 week in the 2019 month of the Mad God.
I mean,
hasn't appeared since then. It wasn't like the best thing. It was kind of a cool idea. I don't know. It was like this was the focus of Month of the Mad God. There was just the Oryx Horde. You know, it's this big event in the realm.
It was a pretty cool event, but it's kind of.
It was a cool idea too. It's like
usefulness, I suppose.
Yeah, at this point, it was really cool looking back. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but it was a cool. Like, you know, you had Craig, and you just destroy his ritual, and it all goes wrong, and you summon all these super powered minions. And eventually Oryx himself.
Okay, next up was probably one of their best additions. Honestly, probably one of the most successful dungeons they've ever done, the Parasite Chambers.
One of my favorite dungeons, actually. It looks nice, it has the environmental storytelling, as I already said. It was a neat theme for the Halloween. They also had, just around that time, they added the Hollow King Necromancer set, I believe, which I do still like. Visually, it doesn't look the best, but it's still a cool set. I do like the stats of it. You get a ton of attack with the skull.
That was the patch where they added bone piles and
Oh, bone
reskin
piles.
jug.
That is actually one of the memories I have, you know, just running around killing bone piles.
I
I get that
remember
skin.
running around on a ninja and just killing bone piles because
That was kind of nice, honestly.
it was not the best designed event, but it was kind of fun.
It was nice. I didn't mind it so much. They don't do that so much anymore. Instead, they have stuff that appears in Godlands, like the heralds during this month of the Mad God, or for Easter this year they had eggs, and for Oryxmas they had presents.
Yeah.
So they kind of do that same thing except in Godlands, which makes sense, I suppose. Well, the heralds, for whatever reason, are a quest instead of having to find them, which I don't know if that was like an experimental thing. I don't like it that much because it just leads to like one big steamroll of all of them,
Yeah,
and there's no like, oh, you should find one. That's neat.
I liked him being in Midlands because you had to actively go out and find them. You
And you
wouldn't
just
just
ran
find them
around
while God cleared.
and looked for them and killed them and got all these bone tokens, so you'll get that cool wizard skin,
The back
which is a pretty cool wizard skin. But there's so many good wizard skins that kind of gets overshadowed. Which is one thing that happens. There's so many skins, and a lot of them go to like Wizard and Warrior. Warrior has a ton of skins versus other classes which don't have a ton of skins.
I
Of course,
mean,
some of them are like Bard, Samurai, and some are all new, so it makes sense that they don't have a lot. But Warrior just has so many. It feels like every like skin that doesn't really fit another class. It's kind of like the miscellaneous family in Pet. Just all the pet
just
skins that don't really fit
everything
anywhere
that,
else just go there.
The next dungeon that they made was the Santa's Workshop.
That one's still kind of a cool dungeon today, even though the loot is just whatever, and you just do it for the complete. When it released, that was awesome. It's like, oh, you gotta rush to get as much loot as possible.
Yeah, that was before
Cool idea.
Lost Halls even, so it was actually tops.
Yeah, you had like the best stuff, because you had the reskin Oryxmas items. Or no, you didn't. You had the reskin tops, I think. Or no, I think those were actually
It
added
was
later. But
the
you still had.
Oryxmas tops.
Yeah, you had the tier 6 ability. You did always have those. That was like the main draw. And you could also get unbound rings from the last room if you made it that far.
Yeah.
But today it doesn't really drop that much. Like you might get the odd ability or two, but you mostly just do it to get that complete for the Realm of the Mad God fame bonus.
That's also when they added Permafrost Lord, who is
I too like
all
the
the limited
Permafrost Lord.
bosses that they've made. Of all of them, Permafrost Lord's pretty cool.
Permafrost Lord is pretty cool. It certainly beats one of the other Oryxmas event counters, which we'll get to later, I imagine, through this list of changelog.
Yeah, I'm just going through the Valentine's event that doesn't really have much of a consequence, where they just had love letters and
I do
the
remember that
Archer
one.
set.
I never really cared for that Valentine's Day events, even though Soulful Affection is a pretty great item. That wasn't added till later anyways, but
Yeah.
I don't really feel like playing, especially during February. February is like after the month, after the Oryxmas rush and whatnot, so it's like I'm kind of done with the game at that point.
And then, there was Leprechaun Return, and then they had, Biff.
Biff really is a classic, wow.
Yeah.
It's not a very well-defined boss, he just shoots tons of shots that both pet stasis and confuse. And he does have some semblance of AI, but most of the time it's just, oh, he's shooting lots of shots. Just don't take too many of them, and probably don't get hit by the confuse. But it's still neat. There's a couple like vanity items, but they are still somewhat usable. The helm of the Swift Bunny isn't really good anymore because it still has a cooldown unlike all the other helms. But back then it had like the most uptime for the speedy, if you liked happy and speedy for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And the Vitamin Buster still gives 10 vitality, which especially with Vital Combat is a lot of vitality.
I I mean,
And it
yeah,
also dropped
but
tokens and whatever for Easter. So Viv is a cool boss, except for like the design. It's kind of funny, you know. You had to actually hunt the eggs down before. Like they did become quests after ints were killed, or maybe it was before ints were killed. But for the beginning, you just kind of hunted them down, and then you killed all the eggs, and then Biff showed up. He doesn't do that anymore, but that was just a fun little neat event. A lot of the events today are just not super creative. You know, it's just farm tokens from realm encounters, and then you can progress in the campaign. Back then, you know, they got pretty creative, especially with that one. You know, you had to hunt all the eggs. Even though they didn't drop anything, they had a little bunny that spawned with them, which is cute.
I mean, it was a bunny. It looked nice. The next thing that I guess I could say that they did was the Ice Cave rework.
Oh, the first one. Or no, the Ice Cave rework, there wasn't a second one. That was really something. It was kind of like the first reconstruction, except not quite, because they didn't like add anything new in terms of visuals, and the boss wasn't changed a whole lot. They just changed the sprite projectiles to look a lot more like sensible. They looked pretty terrible before, and they made the dungeon an actual dungeon. Originally, it was certainly something. Now it's like an actual dungeon. It's just a big cave, and you just killed stuff, and everyone sat on the snow until the dungeon opened, and they just went on ahead.
I also
Wow, it's
managed
nice
to
cave.
miss the addition of Lost Halls somewhere.
I thought that was Month of the Mad God 2018 when they did that.
No, I don't think so.
No, it would have been Month of the Mad God 2017.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to go back and look at.
I know it was a Month of the Mad God, and 2018 is when they reworked it, so it wouldn't have been then. So it would have had to have been 2017. So Lost Halls,
yeah,
original
Month of
Lost
the
Halls.
Mad God 2017.
Yeah, Month of the Lost Halls. That was really something. When it first released, I was really bad, so I never bothered with it. I never did
Original
Lost
Halls was kind of cool. I understand why it's been reworked and what the problems with it were, but for the time, it was a really cool dungeon that was added.
It was a big release. We also missed Nest at some point. Because I remember it said on the wiki somewhere that Lost Halls then beat Nest as the longest, like, in-development dungeon. Because this were, like, the first actual in-game dungeons, so they had actual development time put into them besides, like, a few months, you know, or whatever. These had, like, several months of dedicated development, and they were pretty cool. Except Void isn't that great, especially now. Lost Souls is really showing its age. Even the 2.0. The original one, no offense to the artist, but it was something visually. I'm sure they know that the sprites have been updated a lot. If you look at the original Marble Colossus, it was kind of just a mess of shades.
Okay, Nest was 2017, right before Halls. Okay.
It was before Halls. I thought it was. Nest is a kind of neat dungeon. It hasn't been changed a whole lot over the years, unlike Halls, which
they
had a pretty
removed
large
a
rework.
little bit of the confuses in the dungeon. That's about it.
Yeah, they tweaked a couple things. It has probably held up a lot better than Lost Souls, though it kind of has fallen as its top of in-game kind of statuses when it first released. Kind of just whatever
okay,
now.
Nest was the patch right before Halls.
It's like barely in-game by today's standards.
I would say it's harder than a lot of other in-game things.
It's harder than Cultist Hideout, honestly. Because Cultist Hideout is not very difficult.
It's harder than Cult. I'd say it's probably harder than Fungal. Though Fungal...
I don't know about that. Fungal
has Child Phase, but aside from that, it's not that difficult.
Yeah, Fungal has that one relatively difficult phase. None of the rest really stands out as difficult. It's one of my favorite dungeons, though. I love the theme of it, and the Crystal Worm Mother fight's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I just completely missed Nest and Lost Halls, which I don't...
They're very important dungeons. We just scrolled past them. It's okay. The Lost Halls wasn't very exciting until... I can't really say anything on the original Lost Halls because I never did it.
I did it a bit. I didn't do it a ton, but I did a couple runs. I think I did like 20 Void runs and a lot of
I did know there was
runs.
like it looked awful. Like It was super repetitive too. All the rooms were the same. You had to breadcrumb.
Alright, so let's see. Let's get back to where I was. Magic Woods.
Oh, I do remember
Magic
that
Woods was
releasing.
one of the first just low-tier dungeons that they released by itself, which was a nice addition because just having a low-tier dungeon too is kind of cool.
Yeah, it had whites that neither of them were really considered very good at this time. Spirit staff was okay because right now it's just like a tier 12 staff basically. So if you were struggling to get one of those, you can do Magic Woods instead, which is a lot easier. And Orb of Enchantment has never really been used by anyone. It's kind of a neat idea, but you don't see people using it. Never did.
I've never seen somebody use it.
On testing, I remember it wasn't even a white bag drop. They made it one when they put it on prod.
Then the next up is the Lost Halls rework.
That one was pretty big. We see what we have today. It's obviously today it's showing its age, but it's alright still. MBC is still a pretty good fight for the most part. Cold is really uninteresting. It's kind of neat actually, but the fights themselves not super difficult. And Void is reliant on having people. It's extremely difficult to solo. So hopefully we'll get a Void rework at some point, though probably not this year. We had Shatters this year, so we won't see that for at least a year, but I think it'll be multiple years before we see a Void rework, honestly.
Probably.
Just we'll have to wait and see.
Next up is the Nigerian Reef, which...
That was a cool dungeon. Like, I still think that one's pretty cool. It's not the most fun to do all the time, but it's a cool dungeon.
I think Nigerian Reef is cool. It doesn't really drop anything worth doing it for.
It drops the Bottled Metallizone, which was a pretty good poison when it released, but it had a cooldown that really dragged it down. Then after, however, what has it been, 4 years, they removed the cooldown, but now they've added Polarity Poison, which is just pretty much better.
Yeah.
Although that is in-game.
I mean...
And then the Nidaria Rod, it's a decent scepter, but it's for its purpose, it's kind of outclassed by Honey Scepter Supreme, which is sad to say. We'll get to that when Machine, I suppose.
Yeah, Nigerian Reef was cool, just, for where it is, it's not really worth doing.
And nothing in the Court of Works has really been worth doing.
Yeah. Next up was the addition of Samurai.
Samurai was the month of the Mad God, big month the Mad God changed. Samurai is a pretty decent class. People have always called it bad, but it's not so bad. You know, you've got Exposed, which is its own debuff. You don't really see that on anything else.
Yeah.
And it's also got pretty cool stats, pretty cool sprite even.
Samurai was a nice addition. I don't think a lot of people love Samurai, but I don't really think anybody hates Samurai. So I think overall it wasn't a failure as a class. It's pretty nice. I've grown to like it.
And when it first released, it was the first new class in years, so you just had these hordes of samurais just fame training in the realms to level up. That was a sight to behold.
This is where they added Mad God Mayhem. Mad God Mayhem was a pretty cool dungeon.
It's just Deca's boss rush dungeon, kind of like what Battle for the Nexus was, except it didn't have like some catastrophic event that it was based on. Although it created its own catastrophic event with the
catastrophic event with, the Deca
It killed a lot of people. I did lose an assassin to that, I remember. And they nerfed it after a day.
Probably one of the best dungeons.
It has its own white bags. The white bags you get these days are not like super amazingly amazing, you know. The shield was never super good because it was a slow shield. The spell, it used to be like really good, but we've gotten more spells since then. It's still alright, but it's not like top tier type of thing. And the cloak was just an armored cloak, which is pretty good as far as cloaks go. You know, there isn't another armored cloak, but assassin or rogue, sorry, hasn't really gone used ever because it's rogue. You know, pretty solo, antisocial class. And then they added I'm not sure if this. I've had mixed messages of whether this actually drops in Mad God Mayhem or not, but the Tome of Holy Furore is a pretty decent tome, though we now have the Chaotic Scripture, which is always available, and is generally considered the best tome for damage per second.
I'm not sure if that dropped in Mad God Mayhem or not. I know it's.
I'm not sure if it ever did. It didn't at first.
I know it did.
But then I thought maybe they added it in later. I'm not sure whether it was ever added, or if it was added and removed, or if it's still there.
Yeah.
I've heard people say all kinds of things with that. However, it does drop from Mad God Mayhem events, so there's that, and Wine Cellar events.
Yeah. They don't do wine cellar events all that often anymore, though. Next up is Secluded Thicket, which I actually think
It's a cool
is
dungeon.
a pretty underrated dungeon.
It's a pretty cool dungeon. The whites are all super lacking, and all the best ones drop from the first boss, so that's why it just doesn't get any traffic whatsoever.
To be honest,
Which is sad. It's a cool dungeon. The last phase is the kind of phase where you have to learn it. You can't, like, figure it out. You have to sort of learn it.
the stuff that it dropped has been super outclassed.
Yeah, you've got a skull with more range, which no one has ever cared about. A piercing spell, which no one has ever cared about. And an armor-piercing staff, which was good when it first released because there weren't really any staves. But now we have more, like superior and such, that kind of make it not really used.
At the time of its release, it was competing against Cold Staff and Tier 13.
And like in-game tier, you had the Unholy Sacrifice staff, and that was it. And then after that, besides that, it was Vital Unity, and those were your two top tier staves.
The spell was actually somewhat used by some people at some point in time.
Yeah, it took with the old stats that Tablet had, and then they reworked Tablet to be what it is today.
And next up, they had Halloween stuff. Don't really think they added anything.
Halloween, I think that was Totalia, and that was it. That's all that comes to mind. Nothing like super major.
Next up was Christmas again. They didn't really add anything new that December event. I think there were a couple new reskins, but nothing major. Then we move on to 2019.
The waiting for Exalt year, you know, we had the supporter campaign at the end of 2018, and that ran into the beginning of 2019. So not a whole lot of interesting stuff happened. There was the Alien event, I do remember.
There's the April Fools. They didn't really do much.
Oh, there was Machine. They added Machine.
Let's see. April 24th, that's Easter stuff. I don't think they really did anything this Easter event.
There's nothing I can think of.
Oh, and then we have one of the biggest flops of all time, Heroic UDA.
Oh, yes. I do remember that. That was the Heroic Dungeons. Oh man, those are basically non-existent now. They're not removed from the game, but they're just I'm sure they'd love to remove them from the game. They are not popular. They are certainly something.
The basically only time that I ever enjoyed doing them was when there was a massive event for them, and you could basically earn, like, you could do the dungeon in less than 20 seconds and they dropped like 20 fame, and so you could earn like 1 fame a second.
That was the only time anyone ever enjoyed doing Heroic Dungeons.
Yeah, because they made it so that there was no dungeon, it was just directly plopping you into the boss room. So they were, and that was before HP scaling, so they just all got obliterated.
HP scaling was added. Well, no, HP scaling was definitely around for Lost Souls 2.0.
Well, they had HP scaling, but not like dynamic HP scaling.
It wasn't dynamic, no. That was added with Oryx 3. That wasn't until 2020.
Well,
so...
I'm not entirely sure if the Heroic Dungeons had HP scaling. I'm not entirely sure, because I know they died so fast. Quick editor's note. The Heroic Dungeons did have HP scaling. However, because they died so quickly, they were not able to get the bonus HP from HP scaling, and so they effectively had no HP scaling. Anyways, the next dungeon they made was the Cursed Library, which is a pretty
Cursed
good
Library
dungeon.
is a pretty good dungeon, especially for Godlands. You know, you've got a neat little boss fight. It drops Vitality, Wisdom, and Attack. It also added, like, basically all the lore to the game. This was the big update that brought lore.
This was the Golden Dagger update.
They also would have reworked a lot around this time, I do remember. Lair of Draconis was reworked around this time. Lair of Draconis rework, it's more fun for it to play, but still doesn't drop any loot. And to this day, it doesn't drop much loot.
They added, after that, aliens.
Aliens. All of the alien dungeons just feel a bit rushed and repetitive to me, because it's like, they're all the same format. They all have, like, not very interesting bosses. Especially the Golden Sphinx is very known for just jumping on you and instantly killing you. It's sort of like a worse version of the current Woodland Labyrinth boss, you know, Murderous Megamon.
Yeah, it's not a super interesting dungeon. It felt kind of weird and out of place.
Although, nowadays, if you get alien dungeons and you solo them, you get a good bit of potions. They're pretty decent for pots.
Well,
And the whites are all respins. So it can be a good source of those whites if you want them, because they look cool.
Yeah, it's cool whites. They have better XP bonuses than their base forms. It just is kind of outdated now and outclassed by a lot of things. The
I'd love
Entropy
to see an
Reactor
alien
at the time, though, was super busted.
Now it's like, it's hard to get, and it's only like pretty decent. You're forced into using a few specific items that, for many people, are not very desirable. Especially for wizards, you're stuck with Tezcacotl's tail and the spirit staff, which at the time that was basically all there was. But not anymore.
Next up was the lobby rework. We already talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
So we can just move on. Next up was the nest rework. Pretty minor. Next up was the addition of Fungal Cavern. Not a bad dungeon.
I love Fungal Cavern.
Not
Crystal Cavern's a bit easy. It's certainly easier than Fungal, which,
yeah.
you know, maybe not the best thing.
I think this was.
And it's such a cool dungeon. It
pretty
also added
peaceful.
the true evil of the game, the Dwarf Miner.
Steamworks Co. is the evil of the realm.
Steamhammer Mining Co. Yes, really.
Oh, okay, so they added Fungal Cavern. They waited 2 weeks to add Crystal.
And that brought the first like super good wizard spell. You had the Fungal spell, which still to this day is one of the top tier spells. Although before this we did get the tablet rework, which made it really good. And we had the Parasite Nightmare.
Reoccurring Terror is the Parasite one.
Oh, Recurring Terror spell, that's the name, yeah.
Next was Keeper.
Aw, man. I remember the release date of that was kind of funny. They were going to have it on September 11th, but then someone on Reddit pointed out that September 11th was a day, so they pushed it back.
Next edition, Rifts.
Oh, Rifts, that was short-lived. I kind of enjoyed it, but from what I understand, it was super hard to set up the seasons. It took a ton of effort. It wasn't really sustainable.
Rifts was fun. I enjoyed the first season a lot. I ran out of Mintle. I was trying to get on the leaderboards, but I just could not keep grinding for the rest of the event, so I stopped. And
I
then
didn't bother with the
they
leaderboard.
also added the Prismimics, which are
Prismimic
pretty meh.
it's kind of whatever. It's just an event.
Yeah.
It's a cool idea for an event, though.
Uh,
Today, it's just a dungeon modifier, and it's
Pretty much.
outdated as well.
Yeah, they had more Rift seasons. They also added Agents of Oryx stuff. This was when
This
they
was the
started
first
that.
Agents of Oryx. This had the weapons. I remember farming out a ton of mountain temples for weapons.
Next up was the rework quest system. Made the Mighty Standard Epic.
Yeah, Mighty Standard Epic. That was pretty necessary.
Yeah, you could do one cave of 1,000 treasures and get a crown, so it was kind of unbalanced.
And it also allowed them to add more in-game dungeons to the quest pool without allowing you to do one cave of 1,000 treasures to get their whites.
Yeah, pretty necessary, but it was kind of funny. Next up is the Story of War.
The first one. These are not very loved. But they're not like a horrible thing, because it's just, oh, you could pay to get early access to STs.
The Story of War literally does nothing for me either way. I don't care. I'm not going to spend money on it, so it doesn't affect me at all. Next up, Christmas stuff. Not a lot this year.
No, the Frost God was this year, though. That was their, like, desperate attempt to have some random encounter, and it's the most stupid thing ever. I will die
Mad
on this hill.
Pass on
Snowy
Thin
the Frost
Ice.
God. Oh, on Thin Ice. It's funny that the last Rift season was called On Thin Ice. Very fitting name for the last season of Rift.
Wait, you got fame? Was that account fame or base fame? Or like,
It was account fame.
that's a scam.
It was kind of a weird. It was an attempt, you know. It was still a kind of experimental feature, and of course, didn't make it very far.
And yeah, this is the addition of Snowy the Frost God, which is
Snowy the
nothing.
Frost God. My beloved. It just has no reason to exist. It has no interesting drops. It has no dungeon. It does absolutely nothing and dies. That's a pretty good way to describe Snowy the Frost God.
Next up, they added the Agents of Oryx armors. Not
Or
much to
Agents
say
of
about
Oryx.
them.
It's just a fun like event incentive, I suppose.
Like, they're not bad, but they're like the armors specifically don't have much interesting about them. They polished up a bunch of dungeons with very small changes that don't really
Oh, I
matter.
do remember the dungeon polishing. That was pretty nice, the dungeon polishing. A lot of dungeons needed some polishing.
Yeah, just not a lot to say about it. Just another story of war.
Yeah, those you can just disregard. They're just early access to STs.
Yeah. This is Valentine's Day. I think this is the rework Belladonna's.
Rework Belladonna's. I am not a huge fan of it. It's like the last phase, you kill one bud, and then it's just you sit in the corner and it's free. There's not really any reason for the phase to go on. It's not like horrible. The first year it was really scary. They changed it a bit the next year in 2020.
Next up is the dungeon cap.
The dungeon cap that needed to happen.
It definitely needed to happen.
A lot of people in one dungeon just kind of destroys like the whole, just this one little boss
Like,
versus 85 warriors.
well, it wasn't
warriors.
85, it was 200.
Oh yeah, 200.
Because there was a dungeon cap, but you could surpass it very easily.
True, yeah.
So, the dungeon cap actually being a thing was kind of important. This is the machine again. They had the Exalt beta here.
The Exalt beta.
I think this was the closed beta where they had the closed beta open here, not the open beta yet.
Yeah, they had it for a month, and then there was the open beta, which was really something.
The machine like the stuff from the machine was pretty cool.
Yeah, the abilities. We had the Honey Scepter Supreme, the first powerful scepter, and the only powerful scepter that we've gotten in a very long time, since Parasite Chambers, and it's a vanity. It's unironically the most powerful scepter that we've gotten in like 4 years, and it is a vanity item.
The next patch is Exalt.
I remember it was like, it took them a while to get it out, and it was really painful on the Discord.
Next,
It was quite a day.
yeah, Exalt was a big change, but at the same time, it really wasn't. Like,
It was like a big deal.
they removed the home menu, and I'll never forgive them until they add a home menu into the game. But that's about it. Next thing they added was Bard. Bard was actually a pretty cool addition to the game.
Bard, yeah, it was pretty cool. And then we have its ST set, which I will get to in a bit.
I mean, we're not really talking about ST sets. I'm mostly ignoring them, but
Yeah, the STs are not very interesting, but the ST campaign for the Bard was something we already mentioned previously. That
yeah.
was kind of crazy.
Patch notes and free-to-play bonus program. Free-to-play.
Free to
Sure.
play. Free to play.
This was
I
the...
mean, you're free to play for the entire event if you want to get the higher tier rewards.
Quick editor's note here, for those of you who are unaware of the campaign, just so you have some context. The reason we're memeing on this one so much is because the campaign for Bard's ST set would have taken over 80 hours to do, even with efficient grinding, and you only had 2 weeks to do it. So it was quite literally faster to just get a full-time job and work to complete the Bard campaign. The new soundtrack.
The new soundtrack.
That's a controversial thing.
I suppose that would be addressed in the 2021.
You'd know more about that than I do, though. And then, next up, they added Orc Sanctuary.
Orc Sanctuary, of course, the current in-game. We're actually getting to the pretty recent stuff at this point.
Well, yeah, we're getting to the end of 2020, so...
Yeah, Orc Sanctuary, it's a dungeon. But when it first released, BillbosBag had like no phases, and then a week later, he had all the phases. They actually just added like a new phase to BillbosBag, which was a lot to add 1 week. Yeah, it was an in-game dungeon release, not much more to say about it. New stuff, there isn't really anything exciting to say. It's like, oh, this is what we have today.
I mean, yeah, Oryx 3 is like a big thing they added, but I haven't really done it much, so I can't say much about it.
There is the staggers, which make it really easy to just not have to fight him as much. And organized groups, small organized groups that just spread him. The fight is versus a public run where it lasts a pretty decent while and a lot of phases can kill you. Organized runs just go pretty quick and you're not really worried for a lot of the time. I have done a bit of both. For mostly public runs though, but I have done some organized ones previously. And they're really safe. You wouldn't think would be a thing for the in-game dungeon, the final boss.
Yeah, being able to stagger him permanently is not...
It's not permanently, but you can get a stagger into a stagger if you're lucky.
Well, I mean, if you have a super organized group, you can permanently stagger him, but...
There is the world record currently for X3. He doesn't even shoot a single time, which is a bit sad.
Next up is Ancient Ruins. Not
Ancient
a lot
Ruins
to say about that.
It's a UGC dungeon, so yeah, it's cool, but it's a UGC dungeon, so it's cool though. It's a neat little addition. Arcane Rapier is a cool item.
Yeah, but not a lot to say about it. Next up, ST Story of War 4. I don't think people even cared anymore.
No one cared, ever. It was always meant to just be like a bonus thing for paying players. And that's what it's always been. A lot of people complain about it, but it's just there. It doesn't really affect anyone unless people want to pay for it. They can. It was never intended to be like a feature for everyone. It's just early access if you're dedicated to spending lots of money.
Yeah, I have no problem with it. The next thing they added was the Reconstruction Modem G.
Yes, the Mad God Vital Combat, a very massive change to how the game is played.
Complete removal of flash. Vital Combat. I like Vital Combat, but I wish they would have also added the stun and paralyze changes.
Maybe we'll see those someday.
Someday, hopefully. So that Knight's not a permanently useless class. But yeah. Flash client's gone, Reconstruction. Overall, Exaltations.
Exaltations, yeah. Those are... I mentioned those earlier. They are something.
They added Appetizer.
Appetizer is just an encounter. They haven't really done it a whole lot. There's been 3 appearances of Appetizer. All of them have just been you kill it for pet food. The fight itself isn't, like, horrible. It's a bit long for a pet food dropping boss. But I don't mind it.
We can talk about Exaltations for a little while.
Obviously, a lot of big stats like dexterity are on Nest, and for an entire year we had attack on a really easy Shatters, which was not ideal, but they have changed it for Shatters, and maybe we'll see a change for it on Nest for some time in the future.
My plan originally was to fully exalt Knight on all 8 stats in 1 month. I did Dex, and I was very sick after that. And then I decided to do 75 old Shatters in less than 2 days. And you can't take that kind of mental stress. So I quit the game for an entire year, which is pretty fun. Probably one of my better decisions. So yeah,
I did that. I tried to do that with Sorcerer. I did get Nest done on Sorcerer and Priest. And then I got about halfway through Shatters, and I just gave up.
Yeah.
The Shatters, old Shatters was just mind-numbingly boring, especially in like public groups where it goes super slowly. New Shatters is at least interesting, though I haven't done it enough to really gauge how difficult it is, or how much I care.
This next part of the Modem G was where they added Unified Vault.
Unified Vault, that was really buggy on release, but it's still very cool. It saves walking between all your different individual chests. It also made unlimited vault spaces a thing for all the people who actually had all the vault spaces unlocked. I didn't.
Yeah, I mean,
I had like maybe half of them unlocked.
I had a good amount unlocked. I had a fair amount of them unlocked at one point, and then they kept adding more. Yeah, this was also the way they redid XP.
Oh, I do remember that. That was nice.
Yeah.
They redid the system, although it was buggy. A lot of the stuff was buggy, I do remember. That's about everything, though.
Next up, they added High Tech Terror,
High Tech Terror
a dungeon
is...
I know almost nothing about because I.
It has some cool mechanics that I like, but a lot of the attacks are just annoying. That's just, oh, he's spraying out lots of shots. And there's also the whole thing where when there's one vat left, he'll just sit in that vat and he will never leave, and you can't do anything except sit there and wait for him to move, which isn't the most entertaining thing. It's not a bad dungeon though, I do kind of like it.
The next thing they added was the Fame rework, where you could get White Star in like a day on a fresh account
That was
if you abused
something.
Cube Gods.
They did nerf that though eventually.
Yeah, which, is fair.
I have to collect 10,000 cubes to get the big bonuses, and also Death Fame doesn't even contribute to stars.
Next up is the Forge.
When it released, it had blueprints. You had like exalted blueprints with 3 items each dropping from the halls, so people would just do NBC and get like superior blueprint and all that. It was kind of crazy what you could do, and then they changed it a month later. I felt like it was kind of rushed. Even now, it's not as good as it could have been. You can get blueprints from all this. The old blueprints from Orcsmith still exist, so those are a rare collectible now.
They added Jack Frost, which
Jack Frost was a thing from
on,
Rift.
the
It was on
Rifts.
Rift, yeah, on Thin Ice. It's a neat little boss. You collect components from the dungeons. Or no, you collect components from the guys in the realm. On Rifts, it was from dungeons. They replaced marks. But in production, you got snowman parts from the realms, and you used them on Jack Frost. And you got to build the boss, which is kind of a neat little idea. It's kind of cool too. He dropped the new weapons, which unfortunately this was the time when Burst was new. So they're just throwing it on everything. After this though, they kind of stopped throwing it on everything because it doesn't work with Berserk, so it's kind of just worthless, which is unfortunate. But not before it touched all these new Oryxbus UTs, which are all pretty much worthless since they use Berserk with the Burst. Obviously, Cheerful Chipper doesn't use the Burst, so it's actually used a lot by people. It's a pretty cool little item.
Cheerful Chipper is the sword, right?
It's the sword, yeah. It's a neat little sword too. It's like a hatchet.
They also did the reworks of the Crawling Depths, Sewers, and Wood Lab.
Wood Lab, even today, the boss's jump is really scary. I'm not sure if it's reasonable to exist. Because if you don't know about it, you can get surprised immediately killed, which isn't very fun.
I mean, it's not horrible if you keep your distance. You can manage it, but
You can manage
it can catch you off guard if you don't know about it. Crawling Depths was pretty annoying when they first reworked it, but I think it's been nerfed.
First released the rework, I did not like it.
I mean, I don't
very clear
actually
about
have
not
first-hand experience with it, but Toxic
It wasn't.
Sewers, the rework Toxic Sewers
The rework
is pretty cool.
is good. I do like the rework of Toxic Sewers.
And they also added Third Dimension, which I've done like 3 of. The boss has a weird face, that's my only comment.
Which boss?
I don't know. The one that's a snake.
I cannot remember. Oh yeah, the Third Dimension. Yeah, I know what you're talking
That's
about.
what I'm talking about, the weird face boss in there.
Yeah, the Shadow Cube attacker or whatever. It's alright. It's another UGC dungeon. It's like, it's alright. Nothing like super special.
On to 2021.
Now we're like into the modern age.
I mean, we were into the modern age with 03. Anything after 03 is modern age. Well, I'd say anything after Exalt is modern age.
Oh, they added nil drops, that's right.
Oh,
Nil
yes, of
drops.
course. Nil drops. They have like no reason to exist. They're extremely forgettable. They were used to add nil shards, which are calendar filler and mystery box filler. They're just pointless. There's not really anything to talk about. They're pointless. They were pointless from the beginning. No one uses nil drops for like their actual use. They just get it from an event chest and then open it right there. Being able to forge ore is alright though.
I suppose.
Funny how that
Not
update was
at all.
called Remember the Nil, and they were immediately forgotten.
Oh, they actually turned the Archer set from Valentine's Day into a proper ST set. I didn't.
They gave it a sprite and all that.
And then they added the Gardener.
Gardener's a pretty neat little event, honestly. I like
I
it.
like Gardener. He's kind of a cool boss, but he's also
Drops
kinda
Soulful
boring.
Affection too, which, you know, that's a good item. I completely missed out on getting it the previous year because I didn't care.
But you know, not a bad mini boss.
It's a fun little mini boss, and it's a source of Belladonna's Garden. Remember in 2019, they had this weird event where you had to kick like heart barrels or something. Glad that one didn't stay.
Summoner's release.
Summoner. Summoner will have its own episode, I'm sure. Incubation Maze 2. All that. It's an update. For sure.
Yeah. Wait, did they not rework Sprite World at the same time they reworked all the other dungeons?
Sprite World was reworked alongside Deadwater Docks, which was the Summoner release.
Okay.
That is something I do want to talk about. Sprite World, I love the boss fight for Sprite World now. It's really good. In fact, everything about the Sprite World rework is just awesome. I do love it.
I agree with you. I kind of miss the old Sprite World aesthetic. That's a lot of nostalgia on my part. I'd have to say the new Sprite World is pretty good.
And new G-Docks, it's really good as well. Though, not as good as Pirate Cave visually. I don't like the world darker, like more edgy aesthetic of the new of the Deadwater Dock. That's just me though. I love the look of the reconstructed Pirate Cave. It's probably one of my favorite looking dungeons. D-Docks just isn't the same visually. So design, the Calamity Crab is a fun little encounter. The boss is alright, and the drops are pretty decent. Overall, not a dungeon I hate. It's a cool little dungeon.
I'd say the reworked D-Docks is alright. I like how the boss in Sprite World changes colors though. That was a cool addition. And they also made
cool.
the Sprite one shoot rainbow shots. So
Yeah, and the native Sprite God also changes colors. Instead of just being a Sprite God but native, it's like a mini boss sort of.
down here they added Biff's Extras.
Biff's extras were just a promotion. They weren't very a thing, but they are involved in a major controversy in June. That comes in June. I don't think we'll talk about that today. Maybe we'll do an episode on
We're just
controversies.
basically going over the history of Deca here, so.
Yeah, those are involved in a controversy though. Pretty big one too. One of the biggest ones that I can remember anyways.
I mean, I heard about it. I'm not really entirely sure what it was, but
Well, that's another show.
yeah.
Otherwise, on the Biff's extras, not much to say on it.
Not a lot. They added another ST set from like the I didn't even know this one existed. A Paladin ST set from Icecream.
That's a Knight ST set. Nordic Knight and Viewpoint Necromancer.
Yeah.
They're both pretty decent ST sets. And yeah, I do remember that releasing.
They added the drop of the Sorcerer ST set as well. Not Sorcerer, Summoner ST set.
Oh, the Summoner ST set, yeah, that one.
Next up is the Star rework.
Star System rework. It's a Star System rework. They made White Star Heart did it. That's all there is to say on that.
Pretty much. And now we're back up to Month of the Mad God Modern Day, so we've pretty much gone through Deca's history.
So far we've gotten the Shatters rework and dungeon modifiers. Not a fan of dungeon modifiers. Shatters rework's pretty good.
Dungeon modifiers are a cool idea. They need to be implemented better.
Which they are planning to add more modifiers later. It's just a shame that those couldn't have been included now. They're just too busy with Shatters and everything.
So yeah, basically,
Deca has done a lot over the past, what is it, 5 years now? They've had the game for like
yeah, this
almost
is
half its
5
life at
years
this
of
point.
Deca now.
They've certainly done more than Kabam did at this point.
With Exalt and everything, they definitely have changed the game a lot more than Kabam did.
I mean, Kabam did add pets, but Deca has nerfed pets with Fatal Combat.
The whole aesthetic of the game is different though, so I'd say they changed it more.
They've changed the aesthetic a lot too, especially with reconstruction. They've raised the bar for art quality a ton.
I'd say Deca kinda had its rough patches, but I'd say overall it's gotten a lot better than it was.
For sure.
So anyways, that's gonna be it for this first episode.
Our first pretty long one, honestly. There was a lot of history to go through.
I'll probably cut out some of it if it's uninteresting or just dead air, but
A lot of dead air. I mean, it's a first episode. Gotta set the expectations low.
Yeah. We gotta figure out what we want to do.
And also just get into the feel for doing it.
Probably try and figure out a theme for some of the other episodes just so it's less chaotic than this.
This is like the pilot episode.
But
yeah, I think it would be good.
We'll see you next week when we have episode 1.
True episode 1. It'll be great.
Thank you for watching this pilot episode of the Scholarly Sorcerers podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, please leave them in the comments section below. I appreciate all of you for listening, and we'll see you again next week.